What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me today. And of course, we are continuing our series where I give you guys my NHL predictions for this upcoming season of 2021-2022. And since there is only one more team to cover here in the Central Division, we got the lone Canadian team here to cover, the Winnipeg Jets. And once I give you guys a rundown on where I feel the Winnipeg Jets stand this season, I'm going to give you guys a quick recap on my Central Division standings. So entering last season, the Winnipeg Jets were kind of in a weird spot. Everybody knew that this was a team that had a ton of potential, but for some reason, people just overlooked them and didn't expect much from them to even make the playoffs in the North Division. Including myself, I was not sold on this team and I overlooked them and I was wrong. In terms of what they did last season, they were actually a pretty good team. A 30-23-3 record, 63 points, third in the North Division, had a very solid season. In the playoffs, although it started out extremely well, coming off an amazing first round sweep over the Edmonton Oilers, unfortunately, they fell in the second round where they themselves got swept at the hands of the Montreal Canadiens. Taking a look at their offensive stats last year, they averaged a 3.04 goals for per game, which ranked 12th in the NHL, and a 23% power play percentage, which was very good at 7th. And even their defensive stats, they had a pretty solid year, 2.71 goals against per game, which ranked 10th in the league, and an 80.5% penalty kill percentage, which was a respectable 13. Obviously, we know that this is a very good offensive team, but in terms of their solid defensive stats, this was heavily based on the play of Connor Hellebuyck. He played really well throughout the course of the year. We all knew with this Jets team that defense was their glaring issue, and ultimately that was their downfall, especially come playoff time. Taking a look at their top 5 scorers from last season, their leading scorer being Mark Scheifele, who had a really good season, 21 goals, 42 assists for 63 points. We all know that Mark Scheifele is a very consistent first-line center in this league, and we know that he averages around a point per game year in and year out. And in second, we have Kyle Connor, who had 26 goals, which led the team, and 24 assists for 50 points. Amazing goal-scoring winger, one of the most underrated in the game. Just the Winnipeg Jets as a whole are a very underrated team. Then we have a two-way tie for third. First, we got Nikolai Ehlers, who really stepped up here. 47 games, 21 goals, and 25 assists for 46 points. Even with the big names with Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, and potentially Blake Wheeler as well, I think a lot of Jets would argue that Nikolai Ehlers was the most consistent and maybe even the best forward on this Jets team. Although we all knew that Ehlers had the skill set and he was always a very solid player, I think a lot of Jets fans were kind of waiting for him to take the next step to becoming one of the more elite wingers in the NHL, and that's exactly what he did. He had an amazing year. And also in tie for third, we had Blake Wheeler, who had 15 goals and 31 assists for 46 points in 50 games. Wheeler, being an older guy, the captain of the Jets, still solid as ever, and he still produces pretty well offensively, especially on the top line with Scheifele and Kyle Connor. And in fifth, we had Andrew Copp, who had a very amazing breakout season, 15 goals, 24 assists for 39 points in 55 games. Copp being in the top 5 of scoring just goes to show you how deep this Jets forward group is. For him playing primarily on the third line to score nearly 40 points and basically at like a 60-65 point pace over 82 games, that is tremendous value. And then of course, their starting goaltender Connor Hellebuyck, very solid season like usual, 45 games, 24-17-3 record, a 2.58 goals against average, and a 916 save percentage. Like I mentioned before, a lot of people view the Jets defense as maybe below average, and of course Connor Hellebuyck still being able to step up, playing very solidly with that in front of him. There's just no doubt in my mind he's probably a top 5 goalie in the NHL right now. Now, based on what the Jets proved last season, proving that they are a team that really needs to be taken seriously, expectations should be pretty high for this team to make the playoffs in the Central Division. Taking a look at their offseason moves, I think they got substantially better. The biggest need they needed to address was defense, and they did exactly that. Firstly, they added Brendan Dillon from the Washington Capitals, who I feel is a very solid top 4 defenseman. And they also added Nate Schmidt, coming from the Vancouver Canucks, had a bit of a rough year, but we all know he's capable of bouncing back, especially considering his play in the Vegas Golden Knights, where he was pretty solid there. However, they did lose Tucker Pullman and Derek Forbort, who are decent defensemen, but I think they got better in terms of the blue liners they added. And they did shed a little bit of depth, losing Mason Appleton to the Seattle Kraken, and of course Matthew Perreault, pretty decent depth scorer who decided to take his talents to the Montreal Canadiens. But overall, I still see this team as very solid. They addressed their weaknesses, like I said, their defense looks improved. So I think this team should be much better. They should be much more complete, and they definitely are a team that's likely to make the playoffs. Taking a look at who I predict are going to be the top 5 scorers for next season. First, I got Mark Scheifele, who in 81 games I have scoring 28 goals and 56 assists for 84 points. And yes, I say 81 games because that's the most he could play next season, because we all know he got suspended during the playoffs and he didn't fill out the entire suspension because the Jets were swept, so they still had an extra game left for him to serve, and he will serve that at the start of the regular season. But in terms of his production, we all know that Mark Scheifele is a point per game player. He has been throughout the majority of his career. He's as consistent as they come, plain and simple. Then in second, I got Kyle Connor scoring 40 goals and 36 assists for 76 points. I really do think Kyle Connor is one of the more underrated players in this league. He's an elite offensive winger, one of the best goal scorers, low-key, can be a 40-goal scorer. I definitely see that in his repertoire. And then third, I got Nikolai Ehlers scoring 31 goals and adding 41 assists for 72 points. Honestly, based on the amazing year he had last year, I expect him to be just as consistent, and he should score at about a 70-point pace. I do think he should shoot the puck more because I definitely think he has 30-goal potential. And fourth, I got Blake Wheeler scoring very solid 21 goals and 43 assists for 64 points. Obviously, I think the captain of the Jets, he's still a great winger, but I do think with his age, we could potentially see him taking a slight step back. Although 20 goals, 60-point pace, that's pretty good. But I just think, with his age, he might just decline a little bit. But ultimately, he is playing on a stacked offense, so maybe not. Maybe I'm just underrating him at this point. Then in fifth, I actually have Pierre-Luc Dubois scoring 20 goals and 32 assists for a very solid 52 points. Now, I was pretty high on Pierre-Luc Dubois, especially during his time in Columbus. Like when he had that great playoff run in 2020 where he was about a point per game, I really thought he was destined for a breakout season and he was going to fill that role as a legitimate first-line center for the Blue Jackets. However, he got shipped off to Winnipeg and things have not quite worked out so far. However, I still think he has the tool set to be a very good second-line center. And having him start training camp in Winnipeg, knowing full well his role, should definitely benefit him. Now knowing that he's not relied on to be the guy like he was in Columbus, there's definitely going to be less pressure on him. And as a result, I should expect a very solid season. Entering this season, I think this Jets team is good. People might still disrespect this team. They might still underrate them. But I'm not one of those guys, at least not any longer. I like this team on paper. They have a top 5 goaltender, one of the deepest offenses in the league, and a very much improved defense. I think they're going to make the playoffs in a top 3 spot. So yes, I do have him third in the Central Division with a 45-30-7 record for a total of 97 points and making the playoffs. Honestly, I just really see a lot of potential with this young core, and I just don't see how this team got worse. In fact, it got better. I did say playoff hopeful just because the Central Division is a bit tougher, but I have a hard time believing that this team would not make the playoffs. Based on the deep roster they have up front and the amazing goaltending they have, this could low-key be a dark horse team to come out of the West. All right, so now to end off this video, since I've covered all the teams in the Central Division, I'm going to give you a quick recap on how I see the standings playing out this upcoming year. And first, I have Colorado running away quite easily with this division with 113 points. I just think they're the deepest team in this division. They're the best team. They proved it last year winning the President's Trophy. Now, can they get over the hump and finally win that Stanley Cup? That remains to be seen, but I still think they're going to run away with this division pretty handily. Second, I have the Dallas Stars. Maybe I'm a little bit overhyping this team, but I'm really high on this team. I really like their offense. Their defense is one of the best in the league. And I do like their young goaltending with Jake Ottinger taking another step. And third, like I said, Winnipeg, solid team, great goaltending, great offense, improved defense. They should be a top 3 team in the Central at the very least. I can definitely see them being in second and maybe even challenging for first, honestly. I think they're that good. And in fourth, I got the Minnesota Wild with a very solid 96 points in the first wild card. Now again, I think this is just a respectable team. They got pretty decent goaltending. Defensively, I think they're pretty good as well. On offense, obviously they got Kirill Kaprizov. In his contract negotiations, whether he plays or not, that could impact this team moving forward. But ultimately, I still think there's a lot of solid pieces here. Then in fifth, I had the St. Louis Blues as the second wild card with 91 points. Although I think this is a very good offensive team, I think on the blue line and in goal, I'm a little bit skeptical. However, I do think that their offense is good enough to carry them into the playoffs. And there is a lot of great teams in the Central, but I do think the Blues probably should make it. But in terms of what they do in the playoffs, I'm not so sure. Then in sixth, just barely missing the playoffs, I have the Chicago Blackhawks with 89 points. I do think they got substantially better in the offseason. However, I still am a little skeptical about how much better that blue line is. And Fleury being a little bit older, going on a weaker Blackhawks team, I feel like that might impact the goaltending a bit. And also offensively, I know they got Patrick Kane and all that, but they have a very young core up front. I don't really like their bottom 6. I think it's one of the worst in the league, so I don't think they're going to get a ton of depth scoring. I just feel like this team had a lot of changes, and for them to make the hop into like a top 3 team in the Central, or even to make the playoffs, it might be a little too much to ask, but ultimately I could be underrating this team, and maybe they do surprise me and finish a lot higher than what I expected. In seventh, I have the Nashville Predators finishing with 80 points. Based on what they did, Nashville looks like a team that's going to be on the decline. They got a lot younger, and I'm just not sure what this team is right now. I know they have UC Saros, but I just feel like it's going to take a lot for this team to make the playoffs. I don't like them offensively, and defensively they took a step back, especially with trading away Ryan Ellis. So UC Saros is going to have another stellar year if this team is going to be competitive in the Central Division or even be relevant, to be honest. And then, of course, in last, I got the Arizona Coyotes finishing with 63 points. Not even close in the Central Division. Obviously, this is a team that sold off a ton of assets. They're obviously rebuilding. It's clear that they want to tank for a #1 overall pick. They don't have their goaltending anymore. They're not going to be relevant at all, in my opinion. So apart from the Coyotes, which I don't see having any chance of making the playoffs, and maybe Nashville too, I'm fairly confident they're probably not going to make the playoffs. But apart from those two teams, this is a pretty stacked Central Division, and it's going to be very competitive and very tight till the very end. I don't think there's a question about that, in my opinion, at least. So to end off this video, I just put the two divisions together, the Pacific and the Central, and I gave you my overall Western Conference standings. I'm not going to go through everything right now because I've already spoken long enough, but I'll just keep it up here so you guys can dissect it, and I'll just say my outro. That's going to wrap up my season predictions about the Winnipeg Jets and the rest of the Central Division. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Winnipeg's a very solid team like I do, and you think they're going to be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender and maybe just a great team in the regular season? Or do you think I'm overrating this team and you think that in the North Division was the only reason why they were good, and come next season they're not going to be as good? Let me know what you think about all these teams if you want. Click like if you like this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel, and I'm going to get out of here now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one. See you guys later.